UN permanent members call for a sustainable peace and a comprehensive ceasefire in Yemen. UK Foreign Minister discusses Yemen crisis with GCC counterparts in London. Iran's envoy to Houthi rebels, Hassan Erlou, dies after a destabilizing role in the Yemeni conflict. Welcome to Yemen Today TV. This is the English news with me, Rana Swalem. The UN 5 permanent heads of mission met Yemeni Prime Minister in Riyadh. They reiterated their full support for efforts to deliver essential services to the Yemeni people, strengthen government institutions and stabilize the economy. They called on all parties to work together under United Nations auspices to develop an inclusive plan for sustainable peace in the country. They also urgently called on all parties to agree to a comprehensive nationwide ceasefire to facilitate talks aimed at reaching a political settlement. The Foreign Secretary of the United Kingdom, Liz Truss, met foreign ministers of the Gulf Cooperation Council in London. The foreign ministers emphasized the urgent need for a political resolution to the conflict in Yemen and a swift end to the conflict through a political process and negotiations facilitated by the UN, taking into account the GCC initiative and its implementation mechanism, the outcomes of Yemen's National Dialogue Conference, and relevant UN Security Council resolutions. They reaffirmed support for the UN Special Envoy and to the UN Security Council Resolution 2216. The ministers, in addition, strongly condemned Houthis' repeated attacks against civilians. The U.S. Special Envoy to Yemen, Tim Lunderking, said that U.S. main principle in dealing with the Yemeni crisis is to remove external actors from the conflict. He stressed the necessity to put more pressure on the warring parties to engage in negotiations rather than fight. At the same time, Lunderking warned that the continuation of fighting would lead to the worst humanitarian crisis in the world. For his part, spokesperson of the American State Department, Ned Price, said the Houthi offensive continues to pose a serious obstacle to peace efforts. He added that this Houthi offensive is also aggravating the humanitarian conditions on the ground.
What we know is that the Houthi offensive continues to pose a serious obstacle to peace efforts. It is also exacerbating the humanitarian conditions on the ground. Yemen has long been home to one of, if not the, world's worst humanitarian catastrophes. And the ongoing military offensive on the part of the Houthis is only, unfortunately, contributing to that. We welcome the efforts of the Security Council recently to condemn and to press for an end to this offensive. There have been recent sanctions against Houthi military officials associated with the Marib offensive and other Houthi attacks. This, I believe, was the largest package of UN sanctions since the beginning of the war.
International Organization of Migration warned that the humanitarian crisis in Yemen is getting worse. Christer Rottensteiner, head of the IOM mission, said IOM continues to support over 200,000 individuals with essential relief in 65 displacement sites since the start of 2021. The regional director for the Red Cross, Fabrizio Carboni, warned against the humanitarian consequences of the conflict in Yemen. He said all basic services are absent and the amount of humanitarian needs reached catastrophic levels, noting that 80% of the population needs some sort of assistance. Red Cross Regional Director added that the military operations threaten the lives and the livelihoods of civilians, as well as access to water, food, health care and education. On the same line, a relief committee in Al Jawf Governorate warned of a large wave of displacement due to the Houthi missiles. The committee stated that Houthi militia targeted the camps of the displaced people in Al Anan and Al Yatama districts, forcing a number of them to move for safer areas. The committee noted that these camps host about 17,000 individuals who are living in tragic conditions. Recent escalation of fighting has forced 100,000 people to leave their homes, especially in Ma'rib Governorate. They seek safe places to flee from military hostilities. The following report has more details.
Hundreds of families displaced from their homes sleep in the desert. Children, women and elders, everyone here faces the bitter cold night and the simmering heat of the sun during the day in a dry desert with no water or food. A new wave of displacement, this time from Al-Amud around the camp, which was bombed by Houthi militia with missiles and mortar shells. These displaced people has nowhere to go but the desert. Bidding in the sand is the first thing that displaced people do here to start after the journey of searching for a safer shelter.
We took the children and women at night and got here. We were looking for shelter and slept in the desert without shelter and on the sand. In the morning, we went looking for tents, water and food. Suffering is still here. A week has passed and we're here and we're still suffering.
Options are limited for the displaced people, for they have no choice but to adapt. They try to use the possible firewood and timber to set up a tent for them to shelter in. At the time, the urgent humanitarian assistance of the concerned organizations disappeared. Local community, however, provided displaced with what international and local organizations could not. Number of displaced reached 15,000 in one camp, out of 65,000 people who were displaced during months of September and October.
This site, which now hosts more than 15,000 internally displaced people tracking teams are still registering the displaced families and submit them to public humanitarian network. Displacement has reached more than 65,000 people and it is still going on. The first assistance that took place in these sites was the community assist. People of Ma'rib were the first to help the displaced families to alleviate their suffering.
We have not received any assistance so far. There is so-called urgent intervention which occur when the displaced arrives at the camps, with whom we cooperate by providing tents and food.
Displacement numbers increase daily. Internally displaced suffering is exasperating further. This increased the need of humanitarian aids to cover amid an international indifference over Houthi systematic violations that cause displacement for civilians in Ma'rib.
The Irani-backed Houthi militia admitted they have received 1.5 million US dollars from the United Nations for demining efforts. This comes despite reports by human rights organizations confirming that the terrorist Houthi militia is responsible for planting nearly 3 million mines, most of which are still planted in roads, farms, and within residential areas. Iran Foreign Ministry announced the death of Hassan Erlou, the envoy to Houthi rebels, died of COVID on Tuesday despite his evacuation from the rebel-held capital Sana'a in a rare exemption from Saudi Arabia. The following report looks at the destabilizing role that Erlou played in the Yemeni conflict.
The de facto ruler of Sana'a and the man responsible for attacks launched by Houthis has died of COVID-19 after being repatriated last week, Iran's foreign ministry said. Ministry spokesman Saeed Khatibzadeh told state media that Hassan Irlou was evacuated in poor conditions. A high-ranking Saudi official announced that Iran's envoy to rebel Houthi movement left the capital Sana'a on an Iraqi airplane, which the Saudis allowed to land and take off from the airport in the city under the control of the Houthi coup. On the other hand, the Iranian opposition indicated that Iran's representative to the Houthis was assassinated in Sana'a. Irlou left on an Iraqi plane to Baghdad as the agreement to allow his departure came after Iraqi and Omani mediation. On October 2020, Iran dispatched Hassan Irlou, one of the leaders of the Quds Force, to Sana'a as the Iranian regime's ambassador in Yemen. Last December, the US Treasury blacklisted Irlou and described him as an official of Iran's elite Quds Force, the overseas arm of Iran's Revolutionary Guards and a pillar of Iranian efforts to project power in Yemen, Syria and elsewhere. After Irlou arrived in Sana'a, the US State Department had warned of an expansion of the conflict in the country. State Department spokesman Ned Price said that Biden's administration hopes that Irlou's departure could be a sign for Yemenis to understand the destabilizing role of Iran.
We do hope that the departure of the Iranian ambassador from Yemen, we hope it is a sign that Yemenis understand the profoundly destabilizing role that Iran has been playing in their country for some time now. Iran's support for armed groups threatens international and regional security. It threatens our forces, our diplomatic personnel, and our partners in the region and elsewhere. We, as an administration, are committed to countering the destabilizing influence and role that Iran is playing throughout the region, including with its support to proxies and other elements in Yemen.
The Iranian diplomat has been deeply involved in helping the Houthis with battlefield planning, but his influence in Yemen has bolstered a negative perception in the country that the militant force answers to Tehran. United Nations inspectors have repeatedly found Iranian-made parts in the wreckage of drones and missiles fired at Saudi Arabia. Political experts believe that Irlou had recently kept a low profile due to illness and political tension, and that some Houthi leaders had resented perceived interference by Irlou. Sources talk about differences between wings within the Houthi militia leaders over the powers of Irlou to control their authority. Saudi Arabia and Iran launched direct talks this year at a time when global powers are trying to salvage a nuclear pact with Tehran, and as UN-led efforts to end the Yemen war stall.
Government forces said they killed 40 militants of the Houthi militia south of Ma'rib Governorate after they set a trap for them. In the same context, the coalition announced it killed more than 300 members of the Houthi militia in northeastern Yemen after carrying out 29 operations in Ma'rib and Al Jawf during the past 24 hours. Dozens of Houthis were killed and others wounded in violent clashes in Maqbana west of Taiz and east of Hodeidah. A field source said that the joint forces supported by coalition aircrafts inflicted heavy losses on the Houthi militias during the ongoing clashes since this morning. Coming next. Empowering Women in the Time of War, Aden hosts Midwives Annual Forum.
اضطرينا ان احنا نغادر من ذي وزحنا.
الله يستنقذكم يا محويتني، لا الله يستنقذ.
Welcome back. Midwives in Yemen have a big role in sustaining the flow of health services and in providing health care for Yemeni women. The role of midwives was discussed during a meeting in Aden. More about this is in the following report.
with the aim of strengthening the role of midwives and empowering them to play their active role in society and to create a more effective community partnership. The population sector at the Ministry of Health in the city of Aden, in cooperation with Mary Stopes International Organization, held an event of the first annual meeting of midwives for a better life for mother and child.
Today is an important day for the medical sector and for Mary Stopes organization. Today is also the international celebration for midwives. Midwives have a very important role as they help lowering the death rates for mothers and newborns.
The importance of the role that midwives play in their contribution to alleviate the suffering of the expectant mother and relieving pressure on hospitals, while actively contributing to strengthening the health system and delivering awareness messages to various community sectors, is what the organizers of this forum stood on.
We managed to reach villages and rural places to help pregnant women give birth, and thank God for Mary Stopes organization for helping us and for giving us courses on family planning, post-abortion care and pregnant women care.
Supporting community midwives is important as they are training, rehabilitating in order to perform their service and their humanitarian duty towards protecting the pregnant mother and child, and praising the role played by midwives in facing the corona pandemic, and their contribution to saving the mother and child is also very important.
I want to praise all midwives in Yemen, and I also want to thank them for their hard work regarding taking care of mothers and newborns despite the circumstances of Yemen. Midwives are considered almost the only source to help pregnant women and newborn babies.
The forum, in which the participants reviewed a number of programs and activities offered by the Mary Stopes organization and its contribution to strengthening the work of midwives and reproductive health services. Nearly 100 midwives from different governorates were also honored. If you empower a man, you empower one person, but if you empower a woman, you empower an entire nation.
The European Union announced it allocated €75 million in additional financing for development in Yemen. It's expected that 3 projects will start in 2022 to create diverse economic opportunities for youth, women and men. A UN report confirmed that since the Houthi coup, Yemen has experienced a collapse in gross domestic product growth, with real output shrinking by 50% between 2014 and 2020. Further, the recent reshuffling of the central bank has also helped recover the value of the rial. More details are in the following report.
Will the Yemeni rial exchange rate continue to improve against the dollar in the coming days? On Sunday, the Yemeni rial achieved a significant improvement against the dollar, according to money changers and dealers in the exchange market in the city of Aden in the south of the country. The value of the local currency continued its continuous relative improvement 2 weeks ago, to record a significant increase in exchange rate transactions in the parallel black market to about 1,085 rials per dollar for purchase and 1,290 rials for sale, compared to 1,330 per dollar for purchase and 1,365 for sale last Saturday, while it was 1,600 rials to the dollar 2 weeks ago.
We look forward to playing a big role, especially with these changes that occurred in the administrative structure of the central bank, through developing a strategy and monetary policy for all transactions related to economic affairs and the central bank's procedures regarding the local currency.
The street believes that the sudden improvement in the Yemeni rial exchange rates was not a real improvement as a result of financial and monetary reforms or as a result of measures taken by the central bank, but rather as a result of the expectations of currency speculators in the exchange market.
We are being optimistic. We hope that the new Central Bank Board of Directors, led by the new governor, will improve the situation of citizens, especially in Aden, as people suffer a lot and complain about the high prices. We have high expectations, especially after we witnessed a significant improvement in the foreign currency rates against US dollar and Saudi riyals. There was an obvious decrease in the currency rates, and we hope that this would affect the high prices issue.
It is noteworthy that the value of the Yemeni currency had recently witnessed a sharp decline that pushed it to its lowest level at the beginning of this month, when it crossed the barrier of 1,700 rials to the dollar, in the worst collapse of its value in the country's history since the start of the war 7 years ago, which sparked sharp price increases amid escalating warnings of an impending economic and humanitarian catastrophe. A state of cautious optimism prevails in the Yemeni rial exchange market in the areas of legitimacy, after achieving a tangible improvement against the dollar in a move that some analysts described as fragile and does not reflect a real change, and soon the situation will return to what it was unless some steps are achieved on the ground.
Here's a reminder of the main headlines. UN permanent members called for a sustainable peace and a comprehensive ceasefire in Yemen. UK Foreign Minister discusses Yemen crisis with GCC counterparts in London. Iran's envoy to Houthi rebels, Hassan Erlou, dies after a destabilizing role in the Yemeni conflict. This is the end of the news. Thank you for watching. Have a great day.